This is the prologue chapter of the novel The Death Mage Who Doesn't Want a Fourth Time, written by the author Densuke. Now, I know there are other videos of this already out, but personally, I cannot listen to them. I can't comfortably listen to them, so I decided to do my own. And as well as with understanding from the translator, to edit it and for more easier reading and voice it. So I'm going to be starting the chapter. I hope you enjoy. The Death Mage Who Doesn't Want a Fourth Time, Chapter 0, or the prologue. Amamiya Hiroto woke up. Nope. Amamiya Hiroto woke up in a fairly lit space, empty of everything except the other people he could see around him. Seeing that I'm not cold or soaked in seawater, I guess I've died, and in vain as well. Hiroto thought to himself, thinking back to how he had arrived here. While nothing that the space wasn't like the Sanzu River that he was expecting, but some form of entrance. Wait, did I? Hold on. Hiroto thought to himself, thinking back to how he had arrived here, while noting that the space wasn't the Sanzu River he was expecting, but some form of entrance to the afterlife all the same. He had been on a field trip with fellow students from Yasaka High School when the ship they were taking to their destination sank due to a terrorist bombing. A total of 102 crewmen and passengers perished at the hands of the terrorists. Many of the people around him that were also caught up in the tragedy had varying reactions to being dead. Some were crying, lamenting the fact that they were dead, others occupying themselves with consoling them, and lastly were those who were more relieved that neither their friends nor family were there with them. Hiroto himself felt like crying, to shout that he didn't want to die, that he wanted to keep on living, but he just couldn't muster up the energy to do so. The reason for that, and a self-depreciating comment, happened to be of a girl sitting not too far from him. Her name was Naruse Narumi, who answered to the nickname of Naru, and was the mood maker of the class, and Hiroto had died trying to save her. It happened in an instant, when the ship lurched from the explosion and began to capsize. Narumi had failed to grab the handrail and was beginning to fall when Hiroto grabbed her hand and pulled her back so she could grab the handrail while sacrificing his own safety. Slamming his back on a wall on the way down into the water made his drowning all the more swift. As reckless as it was, he could have comforted himself that he had saved someone, but there she was. No, I think I acted like a good person before I died, Hiroto reassured himself. Even if he was truly dead, nobody would mourn his passing anyway. He'd been an only child when both his parents had died, with his uncle from his father's side taking him in and adopting him. The relationship had been terrible from the start, with Hiroto's uncle taking both the inheritance and condolence money, a customary gift given to the grieving family in sympathy of their loss. His uncle's reasoning had been repayment for the favor of adopting Hiroto, though it was hardly fair in his eyes, considering the blatant abuse and favoritism toward his biological children. Oh no. Oh, crap. Crap. Where? Okay. His uncle's reasoning had been repayment for the favor of adopting Hiroto, though it was hardly fair in his eyes, considering the blatant abuse and favoritism toward his biological children that was heaped on top of that. It was to the point that he was told he would be thrown out once he graduated high school, and considering he had no friends or even a girlfriend, that would have left him truly alone to fend for himself. It had been bad enough that Hiroto's only dream for the future was just a vague idea of being happy. At least he could hope it be At least he could hope it'd be fulfilled in heaven without his uncle nor his family interfering. Sadly, reality held no such leniency. Yeah. Sadly, reality held no such leniency towards such wishes. You lost souls who have lost your lives once already have been chosen. I will grant you special power, a new destiny, new fortune, and with these I will wish for you. Oh, dang it. I will grant you special power, a new destiny, new fortune, and with these I wish for you to live new lives in a world separate from the earth you previously lived on. The man with a halo over his head who had suddenly announced to the group was most likely a god. And instead of heaven, it was the endless circle of transmigration that awaited them after death. It was even more surprising to the group that through it they would be reincarnated into another world. No, it was even more surprising to the group that through it they would be reincarnated in another world. Of course, you may refuse my request. If you choose to do so, you will lose all memories of your previous life and be reborn elsewhere on Earth, as is normal. For those of you who would prefer this, For those of you that would prefer this, For those of you that would prefer this, I would like you to come forward now. While he was wondering who really would want to refuse, Hiroto saw one boy stand up and address the god, though he was unable to hear what he said due to being some distance away. But hearing the god say, "Well then, you may return to the normal cycle of transmigration," and seeing the boy disappear confirmed that he had refused the offer. Since neither Hiroto nor anyone else came forward afterwards, it was obvious that they were taking the offer to receive a special power, be born in a new world with a new family. There was no other scenario that could offer such hope and happiness. I really need to get better at voice, just breathing and all that. Very well, come forward and stand before me as I call out your name. Endo Kyoya, Shihoen Mari, Naruse Narumi, Kaito Kanata, Minami Asagi. As one after another was called, they each received their special power, destiny, and fortune from the god, Narumi included. Seeing that roughly half of everyone had already left, Hiroto was beginning to wonder when his name would be called. Seeing that roughly half of everyone had already left, Hiroto was beginning to wonder when his name would be called. Amamiya Hiroto. No. Amamiya Hiroto. Hiroto thought his name was called out, but realized it was just someone with a similar name when a boy stepped forward. Amemiya. It was a name that Hiroto had never heard before, so he was sure he didn't go to his school. He couldn't help but wonder whether he was a passenger or crewmate of the ship, but he was apparently in his late teens, so he leaned more towards the former. Looking closer, he realized their physiques and looks were so similar that they could pass off as identical twins. While most had received one or two special powers, a rare While most had received one or two special powers, a rare few receiving three, Hiroto saw that Amemiya Hiroto must be highly favored by the gods, since he received an entire 7 special powers. They were even larger in size than the ones received by other people, and when he received his destiny and fortune, there were 2 that the god proceeded to combine into 1. As Hiroto was in awe of Amemiya Hiroto's good fortune, everyone else was called forward until it was only him left that the god finally noticed him. And you are. The god seemed to be highly confused, so Hiroto responded to clear it. I'm Amamiya Hiroto. Hiroto's response, however, surprised the god even further. Amamiya Hiroto? Your surname is Amamiya, written as Shrine of Heaven, and your given name is Hiroto, written as Knowledgeable Person? The god asked, confirming the written form of Hiroto's full name, as Japanese names can have different ways of being spelt, despite being pronounced exactly the same. That's right, Hiroto responded, feeling that something was off, which was further increased as the god let out a groan. Oh dear, your names were so similar that I became mistaken, believing that you and Amamiya Hiroto... Your names were so similar that I became mistaken, believing that you and Amamiya Hiroto to be one person, and gave him all the special powers, destiny, and fortune meant to ensure your safety were given to him. It was a mistake that Hiroto realized happened when he thought his name had been called. But since Amamiya Hiroto has already gone, I cannot bring him back here to have him return your share, with the same being for your destiny and fortune, nor am I able to prepare new blessings for you. So, I'll be starting my new life with nothing? I'm afraid it's worse than that. You'll be starting from a negative position, where you'll never be saved by neither destiny nor coincidence, nor will you be blessed by good fortune. So, not even starting from zero, but already having a negative deficiency? How is that fair? In that case, I'd like to give up on this and return to the normal circle of transmigration, like the boy earlier, Hiroto stated, deciding that if he were just going to reincarnate in another... I forgot a word. In that case, I'd like to give up on this and return to the normal circle of transmigration, like that boy earlier, Hiroto stated, deciding that if he were just going to reincarnate in another terrible life... Hiroto stated, deciding that if he were just going to reincarnate in another world while having to face only hardships, he'd prefer to just give up on it. The time for that decision... I should make some space for that. The time for that decision has already passed, the god said with a shake of his head. Are you serious? Hiroto asked, incredulous of the fact that he could no longer refuse, and was about to raise his objections that such arbitrary rules couldn't exist, when his body was slowly surrounded by light and his consciousness began to fade. Oh. It seems the time of your rebirth has come, the god stated, seeing Hiroto's current appearance. No way! Isn't it too much for me to be the only one to start with nothing? Hiroto shouted in his mind, indignant at how bad things were going for him already. In exchange, your soul now has a large empty frame. That is different from the others being reborn. With your empty frame, instead of special powers, it will most likely contain a tremendous amount of mana. Unfortunately, since you have no aptitude for any of the magical attributes that exist in the world Origin that you will be reborn into, such a thing will be wasted on you. Well, fucking obviously, you dumb cunt! You piece of shit, dumbass! Ugh! The god spoke, as if having heard Hiroto's mental outcry. Is that supposed to be some sort of comfort? To have mana and be unable to use magic is utterly pointless, responded Hiroto, his anger rising at the god's words. I do feel sorry for you. Without any special powers, destiny, or fortune, you will surely be unable to grow in a happy environment, and it will be difficult to escape with your limited future prospects due to your inability to access magic. You will be tormented by an even greater sense of loneliness You will be tormented by an even greater sense of loneliness than what you experienced in your previous life. In your hopelessness, you will struggle to breathe and suffer greatly. But I want you to look forward and live on without giving up or resenting anyone. The god stated in an attempt to encourage Hiroto. Too little, too fucking late, dumbass. You make it sound oh so easy, Hiroto roared mentally, unable to verbally protest as he finally faded completely and began his second life. The world that the god of reincarnation, Rodcourt, had sent Hiroto and the others to was called Origin. It was a world similar to Earth, with the only difference being that it was a world with magic as well as science. The world that the god of reincarnation, Rodcourt, had sent Hiroto and the others to was called Origin. It was a world similar to Earth, with the only difference being that it was a world with magic as well as science. Such differences amazed the 100 people reborn in Origin. With their new lives, they were born to new parents, were saved by moments of good fortune, made use of the special powers that they had been granted, and reunited with each other, recognizing one another through their destinies. While keeping the fact that they had been reborn a secret, they eventually became known as the 100 Yuri. My nose is stuffy. While keeping the fact that they had been reborn a secret, they eventually became known as the 100 Heroes, unknowingly excluding the 101st. Rodcourt's domain was that of the Circle of Transformation for a great... Rodcourt's domain was that of the Circle of Transmigration for a great many worlds, not just Earth and Origins, and he did not involve himself in the lives of the living, which meant he had no temples erected and no worshippers. It also meant that he had no ability to directly descend upon a world and perform miracles. What he was capable of doing was controlling the Circle of Transmigration, and if need be, alter it, though he has almost never had to make any such alterations due to the circles themselves being very well made. However, a recent problem with the Circle of Transmigration of one of the worlds he managed had occurred in it that it had become... However, a recent problem with the Circle of Transmigration of one of the worlds he managed had occurred in that it had... However, a recent problem with the Circle of Transmigration of one of the worlds he managed had occurred in that it had come to a complete standstill some time ago. While other worlds had been functioning normally, this one had been stagnant for a long time. Any progress made, it would soon lose, be it in magic, martial arts, literature, science, engineering, art, or cuisine. So much so that an easily identifiable pattern had been formed. So much so that an easily identifiable pattern... Are you serious? So much so that an easily identifiable pattern had formed. Even after 1,000 years, there wouldn't be any progress made to show for it. Nations would go to war with one another repeatedly, with an occasional hero appearing and bringing victory for their country that would then absorb the defeated nation and unify as much as... I need to fix that. Nations would go to war with one another repeatedly, with an occasional hero appearing and bringing victory for their country that would then absorb the defeated nation and unify as a much larger nation. But that unity would never last, and the country would then collapse in on itself and divide back into smaller countries, and would once more go to war. Even when a more stable peace was attained, other incidents like the appearance of powerful demons would plunge the nations back into chaos and destruction, causing even greater casualties than during the wars. There did exist gods in this world that would directly interact and control the world and lead its people, but at the moment they weren't able to. They had lost much of their strength when they protected their world from a demon king that invaded from another world. It was to the point that the gods had needed to summon heroes from another world to fight alongside them. But even then they were left in a state of weakness that left them unable to direct any form of progression, leading to its stagnation to this day. With the world in such a precarious balance that even a single event could cause the collapse of the stagnating circle of transmigration that had been growing slower and slower as fewer souls were passing through, Rodcourt had heard of a certain rumor that could fix the problem. The rumor had come from gods that maintained other worlds that if you were to pull a soul from another world, leave their memories intact, bestow cheat-like powers, and rebirth them in that world, said world would rapidly develop alarmingly fast in a way that benefited all. While that seemed to be entirely absurd, that a single person with their memories of their past life and cheat-like powers could actually affect an entire world, it was something that he desperately wanted to believe in, to the point that conducting tests following the guidelines of those rumors would be worth it. Even the very world that was the source of Rodcourt's desperation had done something similar. The gods had directly summoned several heroes to assist in their battle with the Demon King. The gods had directly summoned several heroes to assist in their battle with the Demon King, so they hadn't given them any cheat-like abilities when doing so. But they had still managed to be victorious all the same. Sadly, most did not survive beyond the battle, but even then they had left a lasting impact on the world in their short time. My nose is blocked up. Fortunately, there was no Demon King or any other world-ending event happening that may shorten the lifespan of his test subjects, allowing them to have an even greater impact than previously, more so after giving the cheat-like powers that the previous heroes didn't have. And if such an event were to happen, with his authority as the god of reincarnation, Rodcourt could just rebirth them back into the stagnating world as many times as he liked. Even the retention of their memories was a trivial matter to him. As for how to give them cheat-like powers, that was simply taken care of by utilizing the normal powers he had as a god that he never had a reason to use before. Following the earlier feelings that just sending a single person would be absurd, Rodcourt decided to send 100 people to ensure success, and with perfect timing after having finished his preparations, a little over 100 Japanese people had died. With the fleeting knowledge that he had of them, he knew they came from an island nation that had advanced sciences and economics, as well as a peculiar culture. As a side note, Rodcourt had decided to not include the more evil people from the Japanese people that had recently deceased and reincarnate everyone else. But it wasn't going to be the problematic world that he would reincarnate them into just yet. He was sending them to Origin so that they would gain experience and knowledge of things unavailable to them on Earth that the stagnant world would have, thus filling a possible flaw in his plan perfectly. After the reincarnated souls complete their second lives in Origin, he would then grant further power and destinies to more suit them as they are reincarnated once more in the stagnant world. All this time and effort spent preparing would surely mean that the plan would go smoothly after all. However, as Rodcourt had never done anything like this before, he had made a small mistake. While small, the consequences it would bring were something that not even a god could predict what would happen. As if a herald foreshadowing the tragedy that would become of Rodcourt's plans, a soul suddenly appeared right in front of him. Still, the soul that appeared was one he was expecting to be the first. "As I expected, you were unable to live out your life fully, Amamiya Hiroto," Rodcourt said to the 101st reincarnated soul, the one who bore no power, destiny, or fortune, Amamiya Hiroto. He appeared wounded to the point of eliciting feelings of pity, but was surrounded by a sinister aura. "I'll kill them! I'll kill them! Even if I were reborn again, I will never forgive them! That goes for you as well!" Hiroto snarled as he swung at Rodcourt, no care for the fact that he was a god. With the words Rodcourt had told him becoming reality, Amamiya Hiroto had reincarnated in a militaristic country in origin. Born to a prostitute and no biological father, he had left her before Hiroto was born. She had quickly found a new lover who decided to sell the baby so he could buy alcohol, and his mother agreed without a second thought to people who worked at a laboratory that ran illegal research. Upon first examination, he was found to be the most magically inept person in Origin, holding no affinity whatsoever to any of the 7 attributes in Origin. In Origin, there are 7 magical... In Origin, there are 7 magical attributes: Earth, Water, Fire, Wind, as well as Light, Life, and Spatial Magic. Everyone has an affinity for at least one attribute. That was common knowledge. So Hiroto having none baffled the scientists greatly. To them, he was something that defied all logic, something inferior than even an ordinary person. Inversely, they discovered that Hiroto had the largest mana pool they had ever seen, far larger than any ordinary person could have. Such a contradiction left the scientists confused until one among them suggested another possibility. Perhaps it's not that he holds no affinity to any attribute, but that he holds affinity to one that we haven't discovered yet. Would it not be possible? The scientist suggested to his colleagues, spurring them to begin researching such possibilities. It was around this time that Hiroto's memories began to return to him, as several years of research with him as a human test subject began, which resulted in the discovery of the 8th attribute, that of death. Oh, I need water. Excuse me! Where the fuck are you? Water! Shit! Yeah. Penis. It's cold. Stuffy nose. Okay, then. The scientists had Hiroto learn to utilize the newly discovered death attribute magic as they reconstructed his entire body all the way to his brain as they continued their research and experiments. Die! It was just one word that was what it took to completely change Hiroto's circumstance for the worse as he tried to turn on the scientists as the memories had fully returned to him. Afterwards, his very life was taken hostage from him as they filled his body with machines and explosives, and he learned that they didn't view him as a human being, but as an animal to be experimented on. With the return of his memories, the scientists didn't have to spend time teaching him basic knowledge, such as how to read or write, but he wasn't treated any better for it, and he could only feel more easily that he had no freedom whatsoever. Not even when he learned how to use death attribute magic. They only restrained him further, to the point that any sign of defiance was met with an intense, debilitating electrical shock. His days were spent either eating food that, while highly nutritious, was blander than even prison food, or fulfilling any and every order given to him by the scientists for their research. Due to how inept he was at naturally handling mana, Hiroto had to struggle to be able to envelop his body with death attribute mana, or manifest it above his hand. Despite his struggles, he developed many uses with his magic, which benefited the laboratory, the scientists there, and the country they belonged to. Unfortunately, Hiroto was never rewarded for his efforts. Instead, he was restrained even further. The reason was that the better Hiroto got at using death attribute magic, the more fearful the scientists became of him. They increased the amount of explosives planted in his body by placing them in his heart and even his brain. They replaced his right eye with a mechanical one, capable of recording whatever he saw. His mouth and ears were implanted with microphones that would pick up the tiniest sounds. Thus, there wouldn't be anything Hiroto would see, say, or hear that they couldn't monitor. There were other body modifications made that weren't for restraining, but for improving his utility for conducting their experiments, such as modifying his body to be more tuned to death attribute mana and increasing his mana pool. They limited how much food he was allowed to intake so that he would barely have enough energy to fulfill their experiments and nothing else, as well as that they kept him in a tiny room that he was never allowed to leave except for when they wanted him for said experiments. One of the other actions done to ensure his continued incarceration was that they would change the guard at the door and the operator that would give him orders every day, so that there wouldn't be anyone with extended interaction with him who would feel sympathetic and assist him and... Ugh, I can feel that strain in my lungs. One of the other actions done to ensure his continued incarceration was that they would change the guard at the door and the operator that would give him orders every day, so that there wouldn't be anyone with extended interaction with him, feel sympathetic, and attempt to assist him in escaping. The final cruel, inhumane action performed on Hiroto was a procedure done to his brain before he was even 10 years old that denied him the autonomy of his own body and his mana and turned him into a puppet for the laboratory. He spent well over a decade being unable to move even a finger of his own accord after this point. He spent well over a decade being unable to move even a finger of his own accord. Despite all the cruelty done to him in that time, he never despaired and held on to his mental fortitude. One reason was that his death attribute mana would attract the spirits of the dead who would comfort and console him during his suffering. Another reason was that he was waiting for them, that they would eventually come to his rescue. Unfortunately, Hiroto died before that happened. The cause was that his body couldn't handle the increasingly more and more The cause was that his body couldn't handle the increasingly more and more reckless experiments performed by the newer researchers that had held ambitions to surpass their predecessors who had first discovered death attribute magic. In a twist of irony, Hiroto regained his feet. My nose. In a twist of irony, Hiroto regained his freedom through the death of his body. He finally had access to his mana once more as just a soul. With his magic under his control at last, he raised his dead body as an undead and used it to cause rage-fueled havoc on the workers of the laboratory. To the researchers who had toyed with his life as they pleased, he ripped and shredded them like simple pieces of cloth. And to the military personnel that served as guards, he hunted them like animals for sport. Even after they were all dead, Hiroto still rampaged and destroyed the facility that was his hell for many years, and only stopped when he came across several new people. He exclaimed with joy when he recognized them as the people before him, despite having some obvious differences, were clearly the classmates and some of his teachers he had gone to school with in his previous life. And most notably to him was Naruse Narumi among the group. Everyone present was of the group that had reincarnated as he had. They were the hope that held his sanity for 20 years, the source of his belief that he would be rescued. Hiroto felt that while they were definitely quite late, he wasn't going to complain Hiroto felt that while they were definitely quite late, he wasn't going to complain as they were there now, and they could all celebrate having everyone reunited at last. That they could all enjoy living their second life together. Unable to contain his joy at finally seeing them, he made a step towards the group. only to be cruelly reminded of his continuing misfortunes. "Everyone, commence attack!" shouted a young man that held the appearance of being the leader, and everyone responded by firing different magic attacks at the same time. "Wait! Stop! Why are you attacking? I am an ally! One of you!" Hiroto cried out, but was drowned out as varying elements hit him. He had approached completely unguarded and was utterly bewildered as he was hit by blazing hellfire, blades of wind, piercing cold, devastating lightning. Piercing cold and devastating lightning, leaving his body fatally wounded. That was surprisingly quick, considering that supposedly a powerful undead had arisen here, said one of the group as Hiroto stopped moving. "Well, there are 30 of us 100 heroes, so something like this would obviously be no trouble at all," another responded. 100 heroes? You said 100? "No, you're wrong! It's 101! 101 with me!" Hiroto wanted to shout at them, but he couldn't as his throat was destroyed beyond the ability to even moan. His body fared no better as his right arm was a charred husk. His left arm has flown off somewhere out of sight, as well as his legs that were torn off roughly. He could see his mangled left leg in his peripheral vision off in a corner. What was left of his vision, at least. His torso, with the most... He could see his mangled left leg in his peripheral vision off in a corner. What was left of his vision, at least. His torso, with the most surface area, had suffered the brunt of the damage. The reason it was so easy was because this undead let its guard down. Death attribute magic. Such terrifying magic. Moving his remaining eye, Hiroto saw that the one who spoke was Narusa Narumi. Older and much more mature than how he last saw her. "Ah, he's another victim of this laboratory," said the man Hiroto labeled as the leader next to Narumi. Judging by how close they were to each other, Hiroto figured they were a couple. "I'm sure he wants us to kill him," said the leader, directing his attention back to Hiroto. "You're right, Hiroto," said Narumi with a hint of sympathy for the mangled undead before her. "Hiroto? Hiroto? A Memya Hiroto? This guy is a Memya Hiroto?" Hiroto's initial confusion turned to rage as he heard Narumi name the leader. "Let's at least finish him off." "Let's at least finish him off. It's the least we can do for him to ease his suffering," said Narumi. "You're right. That's the best we can do for him. Let's do it together, Narumi," replied Amemiya Hiroto to Narumi. "Don't fuck with me! Why the hell are you the one standing there? You, the one who took my share of power, destiny, and fortune. Why are you trying to finish me off with such a heroic look on your face? Why is it you? Why the fuck did it have to be you? It's your fault that my second life was such a disaster. 100 heroes? You're treating me like an outcast and killing me!" Hiroto cried out with his soul, but was unable to withstand the bright light that came from the hands of Amemiya and Narumi and vanished into dust. "This is all your fault! You call yourself a god? Second life, my ass! You cast me into a hell even worse than my previous life!" Hiroto shouted, and he swung again, his fist covered in a black fog-like substance. Sadly, neither attack had any effect on Rodcourt, as the power difference between a human and a god was just that vast. "I am aware that I have done something horrible to you," Rodcourt said to Hiroto, just like he did when he first sent him off. He then explained to him the reason for reincarnating everyone as he had, using a divine method to directly transmit it all into Hiroto's furious soul. "So you're saying there's a third time?" asked Hiroto, incredulous, but also calmed down somewhat at the prospect of a third chance. That is correct. This is something that has been set since you were first reborn in Origin and cannot be refused, nor can I interrupt the process. Rodcourt responded to Hiroto's question. It was absurd nonsense to Hiroto's eyes, but at the same time it was like finding a rope within reach that could pull him to shore while drowning. I see. Then, in the next world, I'll kill them. I won't let any of the ones who killed me live, since I died first, and that means I'll be the one to reincarnate first, and I'll hold the advantage this time, and this time, I'll be the one to kill them. I'll become an adult before them, gain power, and then find Amemiya Hiroto, and then others as children, and kill them all. That should be possible even for someone like me with no special power. Hiroto applauded to himself with mad glee before directing his attention back to Rodcourt. Now hurry up and grant me all that stuff, Kami-sama. This time you've got a destiny and fortune for me, right? After all, since I died first, there's no way you can confuse me with someone else. Hiroto demanded of Rodcourt while still not having learned the god's name. I have no power to bestow upon you. Rodcourt solemnly told Hiroto as he pressed down on him, who only gave a small as he suddenly rapidly began to fall down. At this point, the only thing I can do is add something, but I cannot give you a power. Why? How is it possible that again I get nothing? Hiroto shouted his indignation at Rodcourt's apologetic response as he continued to become smaller as he fell further. Because I cannot allow others to be killed by you. If you kill the others, the world's development will be hindered. Your death in Origin was the product of a great amount of misfortune, and the same goes for the fact that Amemiya Hiroto and the others were unaware of your existence, even until the very end. But even if I tell you that, I know you will not be satisfied. The biggest contributing factor to that statement was that, after Hiroto had died on the ship and was among the group waiting to reincarnate, he was standing at the edge of the group of souls gathered. Because of those factors, no one had noticed Hiroto. Another had been that there was only one person to refuse to reincarnate, and the last reason was that he was the last to reincarnate out of everyone. Because of these factors, Amemiya Hiroto and the others had explained his absence with a simple, he must have survived somehow and didn't die like the rest of us, or he must have refused to be reincarnated like that other guy. In addition to those reasons before reincarnation, they didn't recognize him after, because of the effect of all the experiments and alterations performed on him had drastically changed his appearance to the point that the only person who could have recognized him, Narumi, was unable to do so. All this misfortune was caused by my own clumsiness. I wished for you to look forward and live on without giving up or resenting anyone. But unfortunately, you were put on a path that made that impossible. Through your discovery of death attribute magic and the development of new magic, you contributed towards Origin's advancement. I hope that you can forgive me for being unable to repay you in any way and forcing you to endure a third life of misfortune. Rodcourt said to the rapidly shrinking form of Hiroto as he fell further away, but even at that distance he could feel Hiroto tell him that he'd never forgive him for what he did. Therefore, all I can do is to have you give up on your foolish revenge before you can commit any sin and hope that you will quickly end your own life. As he said this, something like a ball of slime formed in Rodcourt's hand, which was then sent immediately to Hiroto. Hiroto screamed in agony as the slime permeated his body. This is a curse that can never be lifted, and with it you can never gain new powers even in this new world. However,